on health and financial services in the Middle East and North Africa, with a special focus on all things digital. The conference is hosted by USAID's Sustaining Health Outcomes Through the Private Sector, or SHOPS Plus project. Many of you know SHOPS Plus. We're USAID's global flagship project in private sector health. We support USAID in more than 20 countries and regions, including Mena. My name is Jeanna Holtz. I'm the Director of Health Financing for SHOPS Plus, and I'll be facilitating today's e-conference. I'd like to pose 3 quick questions to our audience. You'll see a link located to a poll in the chat box. Our first question asks you what country you're calling from. So our word cloud is taking shape here. See, we have a number of colleagues who are calling in from the US, though it's early for us, but it's lovely to see colleagues from the MENA region. I see Lebanon, the UAE, Egypt, as well as Jordan, Canada, some European colleagues from Germany, UK, Switzerland. So welcome to everybody. Our second question was to tell us what area of work that you do. And I can see here, my guess was wrong. So we had offered several categories: digital services, and going from left to right, government, financial services, development or humanitarian aid, civil society or a community-based organization, or other. So the large majority at this point of our callers are with development agencies or aid agencies. I had guessed we might have more from financial services, so it may fluctuate as others join, but it's great to see this diversity. Let's take a look at our second question as well, or third question, excuse me. This is a self-assessment of your digital literacy, and we asked you to select a value of 1 to 5. So with a 1 reflecting those who may be newcomers to digital technologies with little or no experience perhaps. And on the other end, a score of 5 would be where an expert would fall. We're a fairly literate bunch. I think our average, as we see here, is 3.8. And I'm trying to read in the lower right corner, is that 31 people, if I'm seeing the number correctly, who have completed the poll. But also see, again, some diversity, and we were anticipating that we may have people with a range of exposure. So regardless of where you stand, it's our hope that today's discussion will provide ample food for thought on how digital financial services and other applications can support regional goals for health in the region. So thank you very much for participating in the poll. Now we'll proceed with the e-conference. So today's e-conference has it will explore 3 overarching questions. First, what do we know about digital financial services in the region? And how can they support paying for and delivering health to underserved populations? Second, where do we want to go next? What opportunities exist for DFS to enable financing and provision of health? And then finally, how will we get there? That is, what actions should we take? Who will take them? And what challenges must we overcome? We've assembled an impressive group of experts who you will have the opportunity to hear from today. So I thank them all for joining us. Each of our speakers will have an opportunity to introduce themselves as their discussions begin. And I'd like to also thank those who've joined us. I'm just checking it. I see we have 67 participants who have connected so far, so welcome again to everybody. I'll go briefly through the agenda. So the conference takes place in 3 parts over a total of 2.5 hours. I'll quickly run through each part. Part 1 is setting the stage for deeper conversations, and it will run for another 15 minutes or so. We'll hear opening remarks from colleagues from USAID's Middle East Region Bureau who are hosting this event. And then we'll hear a lightning talk on digital financial services in Mena by my colleague, Sarah Romorini. Part 2 is where we dig in deeper. Sarah will moderate 2 discussions, and she'll be joined by 2 or 3 experts. Each of these discussions will last about 30 to 35 minutes, and they'll include a bulk of that, or a portion of that time will be for questions and answers. We'll take a closer look at key facets of digital services for health and financial inclusion as we go through these conversations. So the first will be on supply and demand, and it will feature colleagues from Democrats, AXA, and LTB. Then we'll take a short break, during which you will have an opportunity to listen to 2 recorded interviews that showcase some broader applications of digital apps in the health sector. Our second conversation will focus on the enabling environment and infrastructure around digital financial services for health. It will feature colleagues from CGAP and GIZ. When that discussion concludes, there'll be a second and final 10-minute break. After that, we'll resume to part 3, our final part, where a panel of experts in digital financial services will share insights about the future and really be more forward-looking as they reflect on the discussions that have taken place on the future of digital services for health and financial inclusion in the region. And then we'll close out with a final word from our sponsor, USAID. With that, I would like to invite 2 colleagues from USAID to share opening remarks, Carol Wilson and Amy Kay. Carol, let's begin with you, and then Amy, if you'd like to follow, that would be great. Carol and Amy, over to you. Please turn on your video and microphone. Great, I can see you.
Great. I was just going to say welcome. I can't unmute myself, but there we are. So great. Thank you.
Okay, welcome, Carol.
Yes, so welcome everybody, and thank you, Jeannie, for a nice introduction. As noted, my name is Carol Wilson. I'm the director of the Office of Technical Support for the Middle East Bureau here in USAID, and so glad to have everybody joining today. And as Jeannie highlighted, our conference aims to identify opportunities and to formulate actions to increase financial inclusion and access to healthcare in the region. So you'll hear about different assessments today and discuss these exciting topics. And just know that these are a key area of interest to USAID. It fits within our overall USAID's new digital strategy and looking at implementation of that. And certainly we think financial services are a very important aspect of that. So I'm looking forward to the discussions today and hope everybody enjoys the conference. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol, very much for that opening and for the warm welcome. My name is Amy Kay, and I'm a Senior Health Advisor for the Middle East Bureau Office of Technical Support Health Office. I want to add my welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you also for the opening run of show, in addition to the welcome. So welcome to a world that has now become familiar in terms of digital means of connecting with each other in meetings and conferences and in forums across time zones, towers, and fiber optic cables. A little over a year ago, we envisioned this forum in a much different setting. We could have seen many more of you in person in Washington, D.C., serving on panels, having shared coffee breaks and inside meetings, and holding the report we will discuss today in your hands. This planning started before staff were recalled home, ports closed, and planes were grounded due to what is now testament to the power and the harsh reality of global public health threats that span as broad as the world and as singular as our personal health. For the sake of our health and that also connects us, we are more comfortable today in our shared virtual world than we were about a year ago, and couldn't have imagined not so long ago, before the first iPhone launched in 2007 and even the first Zoom meeting launched in 2012. But for all the polish tech can bring, we personally understand now the familiar glitches. Mute please, can you see the slides now? You dropped off, excuse my family member in the background, etc. So, and this forum is also an important part of learning while doing, which is required of ideas and tools that must be real world tested to see what sticks, what really works, and what doesn't just yet. The digital strategy and USAID's vision for digital health could not come at a better time, as we are now to some extent forced into working with technologies and new ways of doing business and providing services that may have in other times left some ideas as novel rather than translated to standard practice. USAID's Accelerating the Journey to Self-Reliance through Strategic Investments in Digital Technologies, a Vision for Action in Digital Health, advances a plan for better health outcomes through strategic investments in digital technologies. As you'll see in the panels and discussions today, the vision puts government, civil society, and the private sector in our partner countries at the center of decision-making and supports the creation of long-lasting sustainable systems. Digital financial services is one advancement from a rapidly growing digital sector used in a rapidly growing health sector, and an important tool that can allow for greater access to health services. Whether you're a single mother seeking maternal and child health services in downtown Cairo, a person on the move seeking care for diabetes or another chronic non-communicable disease in a host country like Jordan or Lebanon, or a person living with HIV in Tunisia seeking options for safety, access to quality, consistent treatment and care. Our ultimate agency, including our Middle East Bureau goal, is healthy people, communities, and societies that in turn underpin the healthy economies and resilient democracies necessary to advance self-reliance, especially in a world affected by COVID-19. So we look forward to our guest panelists and speaker discussions and our discussions with you all today to see how the smart use of digital technologies and services can advance the goal of better health and well-being in Mena. With that, I'll hand over to our SHOPS Plus colleagues and our panelists to kick off. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol and Amy, for those opening remarks. I just wanted to mention as well, I think a question came in around, will we share these slides after the e-conference? The answer is yes. We will. The slides will be available as well as a summary report from the event. Okay, so now it's time to get technical. My colleague Sarah Romorini has co-authored an assessment of digital financial services and health in Mena last year. So she's the perfect person to kick things off and to lead two deeper discussions that will follow. So remember, please use the chat box to contribute questions as well as comments or observations as you listen to Sarah's talk and then as the following discussions take place. We'll pause to answer as many of them as possible during the moderated discussions. So Sarah, over to you to hear more.
Thanks, Jeanna. I'm Sarah Romorini, Digital Solutions Market Lead on SHOPS Plus. And during this presentation, I'll share some key insights from the study that Jeanna mentioned, the SHOPS Plus-led Digital Financial Services, DFS Landscape Study. And we focused on ways to increase the adoption of DFS in the MENA region. And I'll share a quick framework for DFS to thrive, as well as the latest regional findings. Next. So let's get started by taking a step back. Every year, millions of people around the world transition out of poverty, and that's thanks to economic opportunities and new tech and regional growth. And yet millions remain in this cycle of poverty and face potentially debilitating healthcare costs. Financial inclusion and good health, thanks to universal health coverage, those are ways to overcome this cycle, and DFS are a powerful tool. The MENA region has the lowest financial account ownership in the world, and DFS is nascent. And on the other extreme, though, MENA's sub-Saharan neighbors have leapfrogged in the DFS space in the last decade. And today, sub-Saharan Africa is home to more DFS deployments than any other region in the world. In the Middle East, there are 300 million people who are under 24 years old, and it can develop as that digital-first region when it comes to banking, payments, and fintech. But right now, cash is king. So how can the MENA region take advantage of that DFS momentum? Next. Many of you are experts on DFS, and for some, this might be somewhat new. And here's a definition of DFS I'll use. DFS is any financial services accessed or delivered through any digital channels. E-wallets, electronic payments, and mobile money all fall into this category. In short, there's an account that's accessed through digital means that's tied to a specific individual. Next. We studied MENA adopting DFS in our SHOPS-led study, and it was the first that we know of that examined DFS and health in the MENA region. The study included 10 diverse countries, plus the West Bank and Gaza. We explored how stakeholders can integrate DFS in its activities in the region, and we particularly focused on the health sector, which has lagged behind other sectors in the MENA region to leverage digital payments to improve services. Next. We organized our analysis around the 4 pillars of a DFS ecosystem, and we'll be exploring more during part 2 of this e-conference, as Jeanna mentioned. And those pillars are, next. First, those enabling policies and the regulatory environment, and the regulatory frameworks. Next. Second, there's that interoperable e-payment infrastructure that's activated. So that's the national payment system and that national financial switch where money can be stored, exchanged, and tracked. Next. Third is the supply of services. Next. And finally, the success of DFS requires demand from end users who use and understand and trust those services. And in part 2 and in part 3 of today's discussion, we'll be exploring each of those pillars and identifying priorities and ideas about next steps to achieve change. And when those 4 pillars are in place, the advanced applications are more likely to gain traction and thrive, like simple insurance services. Next. With that global context in mind, I'll shift gears to the regional findings of our MENA DFS study. So we found 4 key barriers to adopting DFS: geopolitics, conservative banking culture, low consumer value, and the gender gap. And while these are applicable in other regions, they're especially pronounced in the 11 MENA-focused countries. Next. Despite the barriers, important recent initiatives in MENA are opening up the door to DFS, and these are really exciting. And I've listed a few promising ones here, and you'll hear much more during part 2 of our conversation. And in particular, Egypt is moving forward with being a cashless society, and government transactions are going cashless, which is a step in that direction. Yemen announced it would launch their mobile money platform, and COVID-19 has no doubt led to additional progress. And again, we'll hear about that during part 2. Next. So to make that change possible, we identified 3 accelerators of DFS growth in the MENA region, and I'll share more about each of those. And those will also guide today's e-conference discussion about what the future might look like. These 3 accelerators connect to and have advanced the development of those 4 DFS pillars that I mentioned earlier. And while those 3 accelerators are applicable globally, they're especially pronounced in the MENA region. Next. That enabling regulatory environment is a first accelerator. And one key reform is DFS authorization for e-money issuance by non-banks. A number of MENA countries are moving to allow non-banks to provide financial services securely, which opens up the playing field. And some MENA countries are also reducing requirements for opening accounts while not compromising on security through know your customer rules. And lastly, DFS really thrives on innovation. Enabling regulation requires a dynamic test environment, so innovation hubs and venture capital and regulatory waivers for fintech providers. All of those help regulators and innovators to collaborate. We found that in our study that Egypt, Jordan, and Morocco are the most advanced in terms of creating that enabling environment. And our study shares that comparison of the regulatory environments in all 11 countries. Our second accelerator is how widespread is mobile access. So mobile coverage and access is high, and this really puts the digital in digital financial services in MENA, and the region is incredibly connected. Our third accelerator is support in the region. A number of donors are looking to increase financial inclusion, especially for refugees and for women, and we'll hear more about that today. Here are 3 examples of large regional initiatives that created that positive change for DFS through financial inclusion initiatives. And again, looking forward to hearing more about those. Next. DFS supports underserved groups like refugees with financial services they demand, like remittances, credit, and insurance. And these often either directly or indirectly address health needs. And DFS is a powerful way to get affordable healthcare into the hands of those who need it the most. We found that innovation in DFS is coming mainly from the humanitarian sector, primarily the UN and NGOs for refugees, as well as for remittances and for microfinance. And refugees, of course, are a large underserved population. And while there are some projects that use DFS, the use remains low. And we recommend that efforts must really be co-designed with refugees to overcome those barriers to adoption. Remittances are also a powerful way to increase DFS in the MENA region. And I'm looking forward to a video that we'll see shortly. However, it currently heavily relies on physical cash agents, and that can make transactions costly. It hasn't generally transitioned to DFS because of those complex banking agreements needed between countries. And remittances are potentially big business and especially critical in the wake of COVID-19. And lastly, microfinance institutions, MFIs, serve as that frontline access to underserved populations who might not be able to get a formal loan, but who may be able to access a microloan through an MFI. MFIs are generally underfunded, though, and they can be slow to digitize. This presents a nice partnership opportunity, which also promotes financial inclusion. Next. Leveraging DFS and digital services for health can be a powerful way to advance UHC goals. And we look forward to talking about that more today during part 2 and part 3. And in this study, we examined that current state of DFS in health in MENA. And due to the nascent state generally of DFS in the region, there has been limited use in the health sector in the region. And one of those reasons why is that the region's health sector has made limited progress in digitizing processes. Most facilities are still working with paper, and it's challenging but possible to leapfrog into digital. And I'm looking forward to a video that you'll see later that tackles that. And while that has previously been a barrier, there have been important investments by donors like USAID to digitize health information systems, including health management information systems and electronic health records. That digitization at the patient and facility level can really help open the door to DFS. And some of those encouraging efforts include the HMIS and EHR strengthening work funded by USAID in West Bank and Gaza, efforts underway in Egypt to promote digitization in the insurance sector. And there's also increasing demand for telemedicine, especially in the wake of COVID-19. And we'll hear more about that from our colleague, LTD. Next slide. We're looking forward to today's discussion on what it will take to accelerate adoption for DFS in MENA and particularly for health. And today's demands, especially in light of COVID-19, it definitely adds additional urgency for the call to go digital. Thank you, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion today, your questions, and exploring how DFS can contribute to the region's good health. Thanks again, and over to you, Jeanna.
Yes, thanks very much, Sarah. Just a reminder, please feel free to enter comments and questions into the chat box. I see a comment from Gilles about the upcoming requirement for MFIs to have digital transactions, to be using digital transactions in Egypt with the launch of the Misa card. So please keep adding to that. When you enter your chat, please direct it to everyone so that everybody who's participating will be able to see it. Okay, without further ado, we will transition into part 2 of the e-conference. So as I've mentioned, Sarah will moderate 2 discussions and be joined by colleagues who are experts in these areas. Each of these will be about 30 to 35 minutes. After the first discussion on supply and demand, we'll have a 10-minute break and an opportunity to view 2 videos. Then after the second discussion on enabling environment and infrastructure, we'll take our second and final break before we move into part 3. So Sarah, back over to you. Let's go into these our first discussion.
Great, thanks, Jeanna. So as you mentioned, I'm joined by colleagues from AXA, Democrants, and LTB who will discuss supply and demand of DFS products in the MENA region. And during this discussion, again, please share your questions, comments, updates, especially in the chat, and your experiences. First, though, let's see a brief video about digital insurance and remittances. And this features Democrants' work in the UAE with the money transfer operator Hello Paisa.
Every year, over 200 million migrants around the world send in excess of $500 billion to their families back home in developing countries. These funds guarantee access to basic daily needs such as health services and education, and the hope of a better future for their children. The current health crisis and its impact on employment and reduction in remittances has not only confirmed the crucial importance of these flows, but also highlighted their vulnerability. But the realities of these migrant workers are not measured in the millions being sent around the world, but on the $300 being sent home on a regular basis.
I'm Marvin Lutaya. I'm from Uganda. The funds that I send back home, I used to pay for my sister's education. They're all under me, so I have to fund their education as well. I have a sick mom, and my dad is getting old, so that's a lot of responsibility to me as well. Due to this pandemic, no one knows what will happen. But the fact that I've got insurance with me, I'm at ease. You know, I'm at peace. Life moves on smoothly. I will definitely come back to use Hello Paisa to send money back home, because definitely in 15 minutes they have the money. By the click of the hand, they have the money on their mobile phone. So it's easy for me, and I love their services. I want my family to stay strong. Due to this pandemic we're in, I'll do everything I can in my possible ways to send them back money, to keep them funded, to keep them going on. They'll be having a better life, they'll be happy, and I'll also be happy when they're happy, and I'm fine. I want them to be fine.
Marvin is not alone in his worry. According to a study in 2018 made in the UAE, not being able to send money back home was the most cited concern among the participants. Simple insurance products such as personal accident, life, healthcare can alleviate easily this concern. However, the problem is not the insurance product, but the ability to educate and engage with the clients during the distribution of them. Today, our partners, RISE and Hello Paisa, are playing a very important role on this. Educating the clients on the benefits of having this type of insurance is key. During these difficult times, we have also added the teleconsultation as a benefit, so that our insurers can receive a medical consultation from their homes by just using their mobile phones.
My name is Laarni. I'm very happy that I'm covered by this insurance, especially this is happening right now, like we have the coronavirus, these uncertain times. We don't know what's going to happen to us. So it's very important we're sending regularly money to the Philippines to our loved ones. I would like to tell for my 2 boys that they don't have to worry about me here. I'm safe, I'm protected with the insurance. So I'll be sending regularly money to them. Subscribing is so easy. It's just in the mobile application, and I'll definitely gonna buy this one for my family back home.
Looking at ways to overcome these barriers, IFAD extended a grant to ADA, an inclusive finance NGO that partnered with Democrats to provide insurance to migrants in the Gulf and their families back home via remittance channels. In the UAE, we have worked with money transfer operator Hello Paisa, inclusive fintech Rise, and insurance powerhouse AXA to create simple and cost-effective ways to allow migrant workers to access insurance and redeem claims simply using their mobile phones. Thanks to the power of technology, we have been able to provide affordable and accessible insurance to migrant workers in the UAE and their families back home.
The stories we've just heard are only a few among the millions of migrants around the world, supporting families and entire economies back in their home countries. The UAE is one of the largest remittance sending countries in the world. Through meaningful partnerships such as these, we can work towards closing the protection gap and create accessible financial products to form an ecosystem that supports financial inclusion.
Thanks. And while the audio was a bit choppy, I hope you were able to capture that this video really highlights that the power of tech really can bring affordable insurance to migrant workers and their families. I believe that the video is in the chat for those who are interested. And with that, let's transition to our conversation. Michele, Jalil, and Mikal, would you please turn on your videos? And Michele, would you like to begin? Please introduce yourself.
Definitely, Sarah. Hello, everyone. This is Michele. I'm the CEO of Democrats. I'm very excited to be here today, telling our story. And thank you for inviting us here. In a few words, Democrats is an insurance technology enabler. We are based in the UAE, and we help insurance companies increase their digital presence and access new customer segments. We'll talk about digital insurance via remittance, via microfinance institutions, via mobile operators, and looking forward to this.
Thanks, Michele. Mikal, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Michal Matul. I have financial inclusion background, and since 4 years I'm working for AXA Emerging Customers. AXA Emerging Customers is basically an initiative at AXA Group to help AXA entities in emerging markets to develop products for low-income to mass market consumers. We work across 10 markets. We work a lot also with migrant populations, so that's why we're also present in the Gulf. And these are very, very simple products, health, accident, life, and mostly delivered through B2B2C partnerships with microfinance institutions, banks, remittance players, telcos, lots of options.
Great, thanks. Looking forward to hearing more about that. And Jalil?
Hi, everyone. I am Jalil from Al-Tibbi. Al-Tibbi is an end-to-end digital health platform providing content and primary care telehealth services as well as clinic management system in order to provide a smooth patient journey end-to-end.
Great, thanks so much. And thank you all for joining us. And let's dive right in. My first question for all of you really goes back to it concerns the impact of COVID. And I mentioned previously that remittances and microfinance and telemedicine, those are entry points to expand DFS. And I'm interested to hear how you have seen the demand for these services change due to COVID-19. Jalil, maybe you can start first.
Yeah, COVID-19 came last year as a shock to many, and it really shook the foundations of a lot of healthcare systems around the region. And we found ourselves in a unique position to be able to work with governments and institutions to really try to help alleviate the pressures on the healthcare systems. So we started immediately working with organizations such as UNICEF. We worked with the government of Jordan, providing a COVID hotline, as well as the government of Egypt as well, to provide another COVID hotline. Throughout these systems, we really tried to answer people's anxieties, patients' anxieties, especially those in rural areas where who had problems accessing information in the first place, and then knowing where to get tested, how to get tested, what it all means, where should they go, etc. And all of that was actually helped by technology and telemedicine. We found ourselves at some points reaching peaks of 25 to 30,000 consultations per day, and having all of that while maintaining the same level of quality and the speed of fulfillment, so we could answer as many people as we could. And we could not have done that without technology that could really help make doctors more efficient and diligent in their work.
Thanks, Jalil. And this is really just a conversation, during part 2 and part 3. So, Michele and Mikhail, really looking forward to hearing also just like how this has impacted Demogrants and AXA.
Sure. Mikhail, do you want me to go first?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Go ahead.
We work a lot together, so I think I'll be a bit of overlap. So maybe just as you rightly pointed out, Sarah, and we also heard it from Jalil. I mean, COVID is really tragic for the livelihoods of low-income people in the Mena region, but also elsewhere. And we work closely with microfinance and remittance providers, so we kind of also seen this in our numbers. When you look at the kind of macro data, according to World Bank and other estimates, both kind of demand for remittances and remittance flows and also microfinance, they declined by 15-20% depending on the estimate. And this of course impacted our work, but impacted a bit differently. So let me just unpack it. For remittances, we have, it's a new business for us, so we keep learning, but we have more than 200,000 people insured across the globe, both with money transfer operators, but also with governments. The proposition is mostly for remittance senders. So if something happened to the remittance sender, the migrant, then the family at home will get the benefit. We also working on the propositions for receivers. That's a big financial inclusion agenda, but it's very tricky kind of regulation and compliance wise. But we will launch some of those solutions, at least for the Filipino workers first, and then hopefully in other countries as well. But our models are mostly either freemium or voluntary opt-in. So meaning freemium, meaning that if some money transfer operators, they want to reward their customers for frequent kind of transactions with them, they will just give insurance for free, or people basically when they do the transaction, money transfer transaction at the outlet or digitally, they can basically buy insurance themselves. These are very kind of low ticket policies, so this is kind of less than $1 per month usually. But we've seen really less traction with remittances, and for several reasons. For money transfer operators, it was a big hit. As you know, exchange houses in the Gulf were closed for several months. And it's a new business for them, so it was very hard for them to prioritize to launch new initiatives with us. So we needed to park many of those. But there was definitely less economic migration, but also many migrants were stranded where they are, also in UAE, and they became very, very price sensitive. But basically, on the scarce budget that they had, they just needed to kind of use this money for other things than insurance. It's a slightly different story with microfinance. We have really big portfolio both in Egypt and Morocco. We're insuring 600,000 borrowers in Egypt with 6 and 5 now, with including the leaders like League Foundation, ABA, the BACD, and with Arawach in Morocco, 130,000. But because most of our offerings are mandatory, so meaning when you take a loan, you kind of pay for insurance together with the loan. They not just covering the outstanding loan, but they also providing additional benefits, living benefits to people. So quite often there is the hospital cash cover that is attached to it. Still they're mandatory. So we started the year 2020 with this number of dimensions, and we ended with the same numbers, meaning that microfinance once again showed that it's kind of being immune to the crisis. I know there are lots of problems on the field, lots of loans rescheduling, lots of policies, lots of uncertainty. But again, I think microfinance is still very strong in these regions, and the institutions have not grown last year, but I think the portfolio is the same. We also see it in the claims. There are less claims during the lockdown in the beginning of the year because people were just scared to go to the hospital, but it picked up later on. So I think again that's more or less the same kind of quite stable portfolio. We have done quite many things as AXA to basically help people and our partners to manage the crisis. We offered for many MFIs in Egypt, they had like 1 month free insurance. We provided together with LTV, with Jalil, free telemedicine for 3 months for microfinance borrowers. So happy to chat about this later. And I think we also noticed that this year, I think people are just much more receptive to protection and to kind of remote solutions to access healthcare. So COVID definitely accelerated the agenda. So many of our microfinance partners now are coming to us and they're asking us to increase the value in the mandatory products, and we're quite happy about it. Yeah. So that's a big change from last year. I think different impact with remittances and microfinance, but both channels are still very important for inclusive insurance.
Thanks, Mikhail. And one of the really interesting things too is that we saw our study it took place before COVID, and there was this radical change. And, I mentioned that one of the key barriers that we saw was that trust. And I think, especially in DFS and just in these more remote platforms and virtual platforms. And that's one of the things that, as you say, just COVID has really changed the game on that. And it's been amazing to see, just especially with LTB, when you were mentioning 30,000 customers a day and kind of this unparalleled demand, just COVID has really shifted that a lot. Mikhail, maybe you could, Mikhail, perhaps you can share a little bit about Democrats' experience.
Yes, definitely. So I wanted actually to share some numbers with you guys from the projects that you have seen in the video. As Michal is saying, of course, and we see these across all, traditional digital insurance, microinsurance, insurance awareness, and insurance demand went up drastically, especially for insurance via digital mobile channels versus the one offered by the traditional agents and brokers, and that it makes a lot of sense, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, during the lockdown. If we zoom on the project with Hello Paisa, so the money transfer operator that you have seen in the video, where insurance is linked with the remittance transfer. We have experienced a reduction of 66% in May, June versus February numbers, so pre-COVID numbers. But then it grew back by 770% in November 2020, which was 2.5 times the amount pre-COVID. And also because we started with insurance, but I think a lot of people from this conference are not in the sector, and insurance per se is not really, meaningful. So before we launched this project, we have run quite a few surveys, market research, and I wanted to share a few numbers from a survey we did here in the UAE with 1,500 low-income workers and their remittance recipients back home, especially in two countries, in India and the Philippines, which are two of the highest represented nationalities. Across geography and across nationalities, health is a key concern for migrant workers, followed by job security and stagnant salaries. And of the total remittance recipients in India, 22% of the receivers that were surveyed, they spend the amount directly on health-related issues. 30% goes towards education, and 30% goes on food, and the remaining 18% on debt, which might be health-related, of course. In the Philippines, the numbers are 20% all of the remittances are spent on health and 20% on education, while 26% on food and 10% on debt.
Yeah, thanks for that breakdown, and I really hope that the folks who have joined us on the call, that they're able to check out your video. It was shared in the chat. I know that our connection was a little choppy. We have about 10 minutes left for questions and answers. I know that we've gotten some in the chat, but before we dive into that, I'd love to hear from all of you just how each of your teams are working with MENA's fintech innovators and the central banks to design and offer new digital solutions. And I'm interested especially in hearing what kind of environments are conducive for your work and for you to implement your solutions. Perhaps Shelley, you can go first.
Yeah, I mean, we as Al-Tibbi, we are not specifically or particularly a finance institution, so we don't directly deal with the central banks. Although I remember when we started working with a microfund for women in Jordan, it took us a year and a half to get the approval from the central bank for the fund to be able to offer telehealth to its beneficiaries. So I remember that kind of interaction. But other than that, our work is highly unregulated in this part of the world. I mean, apart from Saudi Arabia and Dubai, no other country in MENA has any regulations regarding telemedicine or telehealth, which makes it a bit of a gray area in how we provide our services. And definitely having that kind of a framework from government would make our life much easier and would make work with financial institutions much easier, because financial institutions by nature are risk averse, and they would prefer to have that kind of security or that kind of framework to work within. So yeah, that's from our end.
Thanks. Mikhail and Michele?
Yeah, let me maybe actually go on this one. I think so. We're based in the UAE, and I think we're very lucky to be based here. The UAE are considered as a hub for fintech, but also for regulatory innovation. A lot of partnerships, such as the one you just saw, are tested here in the UAE, and then they're replicated to other markets in the region. And this is because simply the startups are here, the corporates, and they have the regional or global offices here, and also the regulation is favorable. This doesn't come without challenges, and I'll mention the challenges in a second. But as the conference today is focused on the Arab region, and we have quite a few participants from Mena, I want to take a second to recognize actually what happened yesterday. So while the first mission to Mars was on its way to success, I think it was 50 years ago, a new country, a new nation was being formed. And last night at 8:15 p.m. Dubai time, this young nation, the UAE, created history by becoming the first Arab nation to reach the Mars orbit. And this is one of 5 countries to ever achieve that. So yesterday's example to me reiterates on why the UAE continues to be the hotbed of innovation for the region. Now, the challenges. Going back to the program with remittances. So this was extremely complicated, and I'm sure Michal will agree on this. So in the UAE, insurance is regulated by the insurance authority, and remittances are regulated by the central bank. So there are 2 regulators, and this doubles up to 4 if you include the regulators in the receiving country. Now, currently, the insurance authority is actually being merged under the central bank, which should ease, new partnership and development. But beforehand, especially when we were going to set up these partnerships with insurance company and remittance houses, those players, they were a bit scared by their own regulators, and they want to poke them by doing something that was supervised by a different regulator. So that was quite challenging.
Thanks for sharing that. I know that we have just a couple minutes left, Michal. Just wondering if you could share a couple of reflections on that. And then I also see that we have some great questions in the chat, especially about the LTV platform. So Michal, perhaps you can share a little bit and we could transition to questions.
Yeah, that's a risk. I might go over. No, but I'll just keep to a few points. So first one is that, for inclusive insurance, it's a high volume, low ticket business. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to have a good tech platform to manage those policies. And AXA, as most of the insurers in the world, they have legacy systems that were created to basically serve a few rich people. So it's just impossible. That's why we partnered with Democrats. So we have strategic partnership, and we are live with Democrats in many countries already, in Mexico, Thailand, Gulf, Egypt, and Philippines soon. And I think it's really important because the platform allows us to basically automate enrollment, KYC, but also communications with low-income people. And communications is really important. They need to be notified that they insured. They need to be reminded that they insured, and of course claims. Yeah, so we don't have time to talk about it now, but in Egypt, for example, we work with Microfinance Institutions and Democrats to digitize claims, and all this work, especially in the Mena region, was manual today. So that's really important. Then all the kind of new regulations that came a bit as a result. I mean, they were in the works, but they came faster as the result of COVID, like the mandatory kind of using digital payments for claims payouts in Egypt. It's perfect for us because collecting premiums and paying claims, it's still a challenge if you don't have good kind of digital payment systems established. Yeah, So I think it can open new opportunities basically to provide more value to low-income people with kind of voluntary opt-in solutions as well. And the last point I would like to make, and this is a link to basically LTV and telemedicine. I think if it's digital only, it won't work today anyway, especially in Mena. Yeah, so I think we need to, the way we work is that it should be phygital. So I think we would like to use digital tools because they make everything much more efficient, but you need to have local people involved, branches and physical outlets. And it's a very good example what we've done with LTV in Egypt. We provided this kind of free telemedicine to microfinance borrowers for 3 months. And basically we used loan officers to push for it because we had in other countries, we had the same solutions in Thailand, Mexico, and we were just using digital channels, and we had like 1 to 5% of people enrolling. With LTV, we trained more than 300 loan officers, and thanks to that, we have like 30% of the base enrolling. So we had like 20,000 people who enrolled, and then we had very good utilization as well. LTV took like 4,000 calls from those customers, and this utilization rate is like 30, 40 times bigger than the actual utilization we have seen for telemedicine on similar kind of schemes for middle class in emerging markets. But then the reason for it is that because LTV was using a lot of human touch in their operation. There were welcome calls, there were kind of reminder calls as well. 80% of the reminder calls, they ended up with a doctor consultation. It's really important. If you just give free telemedicine to people, especially low-income people, I don't think they will use it. And maybe, during lockdown times, but not now anymore. So I think if you want to drive digital health, and we really know that digital health is really important for inequalities, you need to basically use a lot of human touch to drive this behavior change. That will take several years for sure.
The word behavior change, that is, it's a common current among all of these, among all of your reflections. And this is really just this unparalleled time for behavior change, and that pivot from, Mikhail, as you were talking about, the former kind of in-person, kind of the physical presences to kind of this transition. And sometimes it's a mix between in-person and digital platforms, but it's definitely just a behavior change throughout. We've gotten some great questions in the chat, especially about the LTV platform, just about how it works and the regulations associated with it. And I wanted to ensure that we will circulate a Q&A after the conference with the materials, just to answer some of the questions that we weren't able to get to right now. We do need to wrap up this part of the conversation, though, transition to our break. And I really want to thank you, Jalil, Michele, and Mikhail, for sharing about the innovations and how you all are really part of the change that's happening, the exciting change that's happening in the region. And with that, over to you, Jeanna. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, everybody. And thanks for that. I think it's a nice place to end, recognizing that technology includes and requires significant human touch, and that's always part of the equation. So we'll take our 10-minute break, and during this time, we'll play 2 videos. So fingers crossed that these play well and you can hear them. Please enjoy them, and we will resume the next conversation in 10 minutes promptly. So by my clock, that will be about 43 minutes past the hour. So in the meantime, stand up and stretch and enjoy the videos. Thank you.
My name is Sausa Baghdadi. I'm a senior health specialist at USAID West Bank in Gaza, and I'm currently working for USAID Yemen. I have PhD in pharmacy, a master's degree in public health, and MBA. I've been working for USAID for 15 years now, and have worked on digital health issues for 12 years. Between 2008 and 2019, USAID West Bank in Gaza has tackled the digital needs of the health sector. Projects we had worked on several health information systems, the most important of which is called Avicenna. Avicenna is a fully equipped hospital information management system which was implemented in 22 health facilities in the West Bank. Avicenna includes 27 medical, financial, and managerial modules, which have been adapted to the specific needs of the Palestinian Ministry of Health and which cover the whole patient cycle in hospitals using international coding standards for diagnosis. In addition, Avicenna is a dynamic national health information system which serves as an essential mechanism for gathering accurate data to empower decision makers with a tool for reform while ensuring efficiency and effectiveness in quality of care. The second information system is called the Electronic Referral System or e-referral. It aims at improving the management of medical referrals of patients requiring specialized tertiary treatment not available through the public health system and who are referred to private or NGO-managed hospitals. The integration of both systems enabled the ministry to see better the importance of interoperability and to work towards it. Examples of this include integrating healthcare record systems, having one patient having one record anywhere in the system. We knew that health information management is crucial to ensure sustainable reform of the Palestinian health system and support the ministry's ambitions to provide the best possible quality of care for all citizens. The introduction of an electronic health information system was a dramatic innovation and culture shift in the ministry's management practices. For the first time, the ministry's hospitals have real-time reliable data on distribution, demand for resources at the patient level. It's very important to tailor applications to user capacity and needs. It's important to cultivate champions, work with them, empower them, and train them. And at the same time, it's important to train users fully in order to make sure that the data is correct in the system and to involve decision makers who are not necessarily very good users of the health information system in order to make use of the data that is there and the wealth of data that is there in the system.
So my name is Robin Dayton, and I am a Senior Technical Advisor with FHI 360, and I focus on security for implementers as well as addressing issues of gender-based violence in HIV programs.
I'm Mahdi Sharafuddin. I'm the Associate Director in the Arab Foundation for Freedoms and Equality based in Beirut. I'm also the head of the security program as well as the capacity building program. We're based in Beirut, but we work in the MENA region.
All right, so Linkages is USAID and PEPFAR funded, and it is a service delivery project focused on HIV services for key populations.
So we try as much as we can to deliver our services through secure means. So sometimes we cannot reach to those in rural areas, but if people have devices, and it's much easier to keep it safer through our communication, through our delivery of the information, such as awareness information, awareness raising around maybe different topics, especially sensitive topics. So here we are not only speaking about the security and the safety of the clients, but also with the service providers, because many times they get threats, and being part of an organization that works for minorities or key population, or work with people who are stigmatized and discriminated against, put them at risk. So we try as much as we can to work simultaneously on to teach and use safe platforms and internet in general, because I'm not saying it's not easier, but more controlled when it comes to safety and security more than physical.
So I think the thing that I'd like to highlight, in addition to what Mahdi spoke to about really understanding the risks intrinsic to the platform that you're on, is that things that happen in a digital space do have real world consequences that we can anticipate and work to mitigate from the beginning. So I just think it's incredibly important for us, as much as we want to enhance the security of the online ecosystem, to think about the real world players that we also need to work with, so that they understand, if they do, for example, receive that information that they're going to have to make some sense of, potentially out of context, that we provide them that context in advance. So something I think is really valuable to consider, regardless of the services that you're offering online, is how much importance there is in making your clients feel that you are taking security seriously. So when people are used to information that they have on their phones potentially being used against them, which does happen in some of these contexts, right? So thinking whatever I'm doing in terms of my communication, whatever apps I download, ultimately this may have some consequences for me, because someone may know what is on my phone and how I'm using it. So you being very upfront, or us being very upfront as we operate these services, and what are we doing to protect your data, not by giving a 10-page terms of agreement, because no one reads those, but by actually articulating, here are the very serious things that we're doing to keep your data safe. And also, here is what we need from you as the user, because so much of this is also from the user side, right? So really articulating how both the service provider and the service user work together to keep their data secure. I think that operates, across any kind of services being offered online. And I think particularly in this region, building up confidence, being transparent about the ways that you're taking this seriously has value for all services.
My advice would be secure all the data and make sure it's not easy to be hacked. So digitizing it in an encrypted way. This can put a lot of people at risk if we don't do so. Not only the providers, the service providers, but also the LGBT community, people living with HIV, any person from the key population who are discriminated against or stigmatized. If we don't store our data securely, we might put them at risk. And this is not the purpose of our work. It's the opposite, actually.
Thanks, everyone, and welcome back. We hope that you enjoyed the videos. And while today's focus is on DFS and health, these videos are really a great reminder of how the MENA region is digitizing, particularly for health. And so we'll transition into the next part of our conversation, and we explored supply and demand for DFS, and we heard some of the exciting developments. And also, please keep the questions coming in the chat. We've gotten some great exchanges there, so again, please keep those coming. Now in this next conversation, we'll talk about two essential foundational areas for DFS: the enabling regulatory environment and a country's e-payment infrastructure. I'm joined by two people who know a whole lot about this topic, Haider Al-Baghdadi from GIZ and Nadine Shahade from the Consultative Group to Assist the Poor, CGAP. Haider and Nadine, would you please turn on your videos? And Nadine, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure, ladies first, I see. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the organizers for having me. My name is Nadine Shahade. I work for CGAP. I cover the entire Arab world, been doing that for the past few years, and as such, been looking very, very closely at digital financial services across the region. Thank you.
Thanks, Nadine. Haider?
Yes, hello. Hello also from, hello from Germany, I have to say. My name is Haider Al-Baghdadi. I'm the head of the program Financial Inclusion in the MENA region. That was also mentioned in Sarah's presentation at the beginning. We work with Arab central banks. There is an initiative called FIARI, Financial Inclusion Initiative for the Arab world. And so actually FIARI is a platform for peer-to-peer learning of Arab central banks to advance financial inclusion in the MENA region. We also work with two other networks since last year. There's a network which is similar to FIARI. It's called EMGN, the Euro-Mediterranean Guarantee Network, which is a network of guarantee institutions. They also want to learn from each other. It's a platform for peer-to-peer learning. And we support a business angel network in the region, in the Mediterranean MENA region, where we want to enable cross-border investments by business angels into startups. That's what we are doing. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic, and welcome to both of you. And let's dive right in. We'll just have a quick conversation and have some time for questions from our participants. And again, please keep those coming in the chat. But first, question for both of you. Both GIZ and CGAP have invested in and have advocated strongly for the creation of an enabling environment as this pathway for financial inclusion. I'd like if you could both describe the kind of regulatory environment that you're advocating for, and what are those kinds of regulatory enablers. Nadine, perhaps you can go first.
Yeah, happy to do that, because that's essentially what I've been working on and repeating for a number of years, including with Haider in some events or in some meetings. And so for us, I think I've shared with your colleague a slide that'd be great to feature here. We did quite a lot of research to understand what are, on the regulatory front, the enablers for digital financial services to take off. And we identified 4 of them. Thank you. The first one is a non-bank e-money issuance. And so that is essentially allowing non-banks, which are not your traditional players, with lighter requirements to offer a store of value. That for us, for people who care about financial inclusion, is one of the key entry points that digital has allowed for a lot of the unbanked to actually access formal financial services. But it goes hand in hand with 3 other enablers. One of them, and I think Haider is going to touch upon this, I'm pretty sure, because that's been a sticky point in the region, is risk-based customer due diligence. When you're offering somebody a low-value account, you're betting on volumes. You don't want to make things so complicated that it takes you, maybe a week to gather all the documentation that you need and a 2-hour conversation with someone to actually open an account, in which you're going to, maybe put maximum $100 a month, never exceed a balance of maybe 1,000. So that's the second one. The third one is the use of agents. I think it was Michal who said, digital, yes, but you also need physical infrastructure. And for us, the use of agents is that distribution network that is across the territory, and that allows you to do, 2 very important things. One, obviously, registration en masse, but more importantly, operations of cash in, cash out, which is what gets people to trust the system. I can put my money in, but I can also access it very rapidly. And the fourth one, which is very important because this is what fosters trust, is consumer protection and making sure that the funds that are here, they usually are pooled at the end of the day with a bank or a formal financial service provider, are always exchangeable one-to-one, that the communication is very transparent, and that at the end of the day, the consumers can actually trust this system. So let me stop here.
Thanks, Nadine. Haider, anything else to add there? I think you might be on mute.
Still happens again and again. Sorry for that. Yeah, no, first of all, I would like to echo what actually Nadine has said, the four enablers, the regulatory enablers. I mean, I just wanted to mention, I mentioned FIARI at my initial statement, that actually FIARI has endorsed last year, it was endorsed by all 22 central bank governors, a framework for digital transformation of Arab financial systems, which also includes the four regulatory areas actually Nadine just highlighted, and these are really the building blocks to advance digital financial service in the Arab world. And it's great that this framework has been issued by FIARI and by the Arab central banks. So I just want to add one or two layers to what actually Nadine has said. So we as GIZ, we often suggest, or also other development partners do that, to actually start with a regulatory impact assessment, to really see what are the challenges, what are the obstacles in advancing digital financial service in your jurisdiction, to really assess the current status of your regulation and supervisory framework, and what are legacy rules that can remain or maybe need to be removed. And based on this regulatory impact assessment, we actually strongly suggest to revise, modernize your regulations with a particular view on proportionality and activity-based regulation, which means the same activity, same risk, same regulation. So we think that it's not like one size fits all. So the regulation should really be based on the activity that you perform and what activity or the underlying financial services, what risk does it expose, and according to that, and also regardless who's the provider of that financial services, to actually design your regulation. If a heavy risk is exposed or a strong risk, then of course the regulation should be tighter. If it's a lighter risk or a smaller risk, then a light touch regulation should be applied. I mean, we have also seen that Arab central banks, in their new role in promoting financial inclusion, they've really become passionate, not only like, drafting regulations or issuing new regulations, but they also have really become a proactive promoter of digital financial services in particular, but also financial inclusion in general. And there they also have different options. I mean, you mentioned in your presentation about the sandbox approach, which is a quite sophisticated approach, I would say. If you want to start simple as a regulator, you can also start with establishing a dedicated unit in your central bank, and where you have some experts who are engaged in a dialogue with fintech companies, with startups, with financial service providers, and to also provide guidance formally or informally for the fintechs, to guide them through the regulatory maze, and to engage in a dialogue, to really learn from the approaches, from the innovative approaches, but also the private sector, that they can learn about the necessity of regulations. So then we have the famous test to learn approach. I mean, probably some of you heard about that. I think we have a very famous example here in Kenya, M-Pesa. I think there's a myth saying that actually the Central Bank of Kenya did nothing. They just said, yes, you can launch, you can issue M-Pesa, this mobile money service, which is not actually true, because prior to that there was a very lengthy and intensive 2-year consultation between the central bank and the Safaricom, the mobile money issuer. And this is a so-called test and learn approach that we also advocate for. Then you have the sandbox approach, which is a little bit more structured, a bit more standardized approach by a central bank. Here, I think this is also quite, this is another approach, the sandbox approach, which is a little bit, requires more effort. And last but not least, you can also, as a regulator, innovate along licenses, right? Actually the licensing regime or approaches. So you can actually start with a restricted license when there's a financial service provider or a fintech who want to start a new service. You can start with a restricted license, really, restricting the number of clients they can serve, or also restricting the regions they can serve. And later, when the business model proves to be right and successful, then later you can provide a full license to this financial service provider. So I want to stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Haider. And that was really helpful just to understand it's not an all or nothing sort of approach. There's this, you can go in and there's these more kind of informal mechanisms, and they don't need to be that sophisticated. It's even just starting that division within the central bank and a dedicated unit who can really start these kinds of discussions, and then you can move to the more sophisticated stuff like the sandbox. Nadine, there's a question for you, and perhaps if you can highlight the difference between wallets and fully fledged bank accounts. And also, Nadine, I noticed that you might have a second slide. Let us know if you want us to show that. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. That's maybe for a bit later in the conversation. But just to understand, like, what's the difference between the two? I mean, I think there's, not necessarily a one definition for what a wallet is, because it can be offered by multiple sort of institutions. Whereas fully fledged bank accounts obviously can only be offered by a bank. I think the Morocco example that is in the chat is quite relevant, and it speaks to that risk-based approach that Haider was mentioning. And so essentially the idea is that you offer a store of value that is offered either by banks, but we know that banks do not do it because that's not the core of their business. They're not interested in the sort of business that, again, I think it was Michal that was mentioning it, that is large volumes, small margins. This is not the core DNA of a full-fledged bank. And so as such, they're not going out to pursue the unbanked in terms of market, and by unbanked we often mean the low-income populations. And so for that, you usually need a new sort of entrance in the market. And this is why in the non-bank e-money issuance, the key word is maybe less e-money issuance than non-bank. And that's often the difference that we're seeing in the markets between the wallet providers, often new entrants, although banks obviously, because they have fully fledged licenses, can also operate in many markets. Morocco is one of them. You actually do have banks entering in that segment. But very often they hit that barrier because you do need that very wide distribution system. And that is a lot of hard work going and speaking, often one-on-one with companies or small merchants to onboard them for them to do this cash in, cash out business that I was mentioning a bit earlier. And that's not the DNA of banks, again. And that's how we differentiate a little bit between these two types of accounts. And within the second type of account, would also, within any of those two accounts, it needs to be a risk-based sort of onboarding for customers.
Thanks, Nadine. Let's transition a little. Haider, anything else to add there?
Well, fine. That's perfect.
Okay. Well, I'll direct a question to you then. Switching gears a little bit, and you've reflected on the current environment a little bit, and hindsight really is 2020 to confirm what investments have paid off over the years to advance financial inclusion. And GIZ has been investing in this significantly over the years. Can you share a little bit about what investments you feel have really paid off? And which ones maybe didn't work as expected?
So me first?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. What has really paid off? I mean, me working with GIZ, of course, I have to say capacity development, but I really think so that actually capacity development, helping to develop the capacity of financial sector regulators, but then also other stakeholders in the financial sector pays off. Like actually developing the capacity of financial inclusion units at a personal level, at institutional level. I think that really pays off. We have done that, for example, with another project in Egypt. That the Central Bank of Egypt has 2 or 3 years ago established a financial inclusion department. So we have helped to capacitate that department. I think this is quite important. That really pays off to invest in the skills of the central bank staff members. The other thing is I really believe in that because I also work with the Alliance for Financial Inclusion before the global network of central banks, and also FIARI is based on that idea of peer-to-peer learning. I think peer-to-peer learning also really pays off, where you give a platform where central bank regulators can talk to other central bank regulators, where they can get inspired by other policies and regulation, or also we assure that what they do is the right thing to do, or also learn from failures, not only from success. So I really think that capacity development, peer-to-peer learning pays off. What we have also seen, we have supported that a lot, is actually sector dialogue, bringing policymakers, regulators, and the private sector together to discuss about the issues at hand. And what has really paid off, and I think Jordan, Central Bank of Jordan was the first country, who is also here, is to actually develop and implement national strategies for financial inclusion. So Central Bank of Jordan was the first country in the Arab world. Then it was followed by Palestine, Morocco, Tunisia. Also, Egypt is now working on a national strategy for financial inclusion. And what I said, it really brings together all the different stakeholders in the financial sector, and they together define goals and indicators to advance financial inclusion in the country. And they also, think and discuss what can they contribute to achieve these goals. So this I also perceive as very successful because it creates momentum and energy on all sides. So if you ask me what hasn't worked so much, it's a good question. I mentioned in my previous answer, I mentioned sandbox approach. And I said that maybe it's easier to start first as a regulator, having a dedicated unit for digital financial services. So if you look at the sandbox approach, maybe the expectations were too high at the beginning, but maybe it's also too early to call it failed or something. But we really want to see the outcomes of sandboxes. What we have seen so far in some countries, that there are not so many applicants, that the survival rate is quite low of fintech companies, but maybe it's premature to call it not a success. Thank you.
Thanks, Heider. And I appreciate that reflection, especially about the sandboxes, because there's a lot of high expectations in there. And, sometimes too, things don't work out as expected. And so again, it's perhaps a little bit too early to say whether or not, failure is too strong of a word, but we certainly have some good lessons learned there. And also helping countries who are exploring these different mechanisms to figure out what the right approach is for them. And to your point too, peer learning is a really powerful mechanism to facilitate that cross-border, pollination. I'll follow up though, just because financial inclusion is just such a underwriting theme of GIZ's work, and perhaps you can share a little bit. Can health drive financial inclusion?
Great question as well. So I was actually talking to my colleagues who are working on health and health insurance. So I would actually refer to the example from Ghana, where we as GIZ work with an international insurance company, where they leverage on technology. And this seems to be quite promising, I have to say. Because what they realized, and we also have AXA here and other insurance experts, and I think they would actually underline that the insurance service as such is oftentimes not enough. So what they have done in Ghana, they have developed additional services, they embedded them into the service, into the insurance service or insurance policy, like informational services, health-related information services, where you can also have two free calls to the doctor, 2 or 3 free calls to the doctor to get a prescription or first examination. And if you want to get more advice or counseling from a doctor, then you have to pay more. And there's also telemedicine involved in the product. And what is quite interesting, that these product insurance policies, they're actually sold at various points in the country. That the rural areas, especially marginalized. So they have kiosks, and in this kiosk they have agents. And the agents, they have an app, and with the help of the app, they actually register the client, and they also inform the clients about the rights and duties of this product. So it's really about actually responsible selling. And I think this is very important to include financial education in your product design. So having said that, now I want to answer your question, is it really a driver of financial inclusion? I would be a little bit hesitant to say so, because we know that insurance is very hard to sell. If you look at all the financial services, insurance is the hardest to sell. Savings, you keep your money. Credit, you get money. But insurance, you pay money upfront and you don't know if you get something back. So this is actually psychologically very difficult to sell. So I would not necessarily say insurance is a driver for financial inclusion, but a driver for microinsurance. I think because health insurance is so relevant for everyone, no? And yeah, that's what I would say. I mean, we have also seen what is the driver of financial inclusion. If we look 20 years back, it was savings. We said micro savings is the driver of financial inclusion. Then later, with the success and advent of M-Pesa, we said payments are the gateway to the financial inclusion, and I think payments are still a driver. Yeah, sorry.
That's fascinating, and I think, Haider, we almost need a separate conference altogether to explore that topic and to bring in our panelists from the first part, from AXA, Democrats, and LTV. Let's switch gears though, as we're pausing real quick, I would like to encourage our participants just to share your questions in the chat. I'd like to go back to, Haider, a point that you mentioned about peer learning. And Nadine, this is a space that CGAP has invested in a whole lot, just especially in the advocacy component. And COVID-19 has really increased those demands on financial systems to transfer money. And I'm interested just actually, let me reset. Nadine, going back to the peer learning, why is it valuable to invest in policy change and to support peer-to-peer learning? And I'd love to hear an example, especially from CGAP, just of where that is happening and where you have seen change happening.
Thank you, Sarah. So I wanted actually to comment when Haider was speaking about PRE, about peer-to-peer learning, because a number of those things, we've done together. We've been through the pains of setting up those networks, but also, some of the positive change that you see. And Haider said it, I think, in maybe 5 seconds it took to say it. But those 5 seconds for us mean usually, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of work. And us, not just us, but our teams as well. And this is what it means. I think this is what is important to keep in mind. I think in this region, we're still, at the early stages of building what is needed. And so you mentioned COVID-19, and when it started, actually, my inbox went crazy. Everybody suddenly in the region and beyond wanted to do, digital payments tomorrow morning because everybody needs to be locked down. And going back to, the fact that learning curve, be it peer-to-peer or non-peer-to-peer advocacy effort, regulatory change in general takes anywhere between 2 to 5 years, made our response quite simple. I mean, either you had it when COVID started, or it was extremely difficult to suddenly put in place and operationalize at scale within, a few weeks. So I think that's the, one thing that would be important to keep in mind. I think Haider, provided quite a long list of examples. He mentioned PRE. We've been engaging together with the colleagues from the Arab Monetary Fund and with, a network of regulators from the region, getting them to discuss, but also, typical study tours. I remember a couple of years ago, Maha probably remembers that as well. Our colleagues from the Central Bank of Tunisia came with our support to Jordan to actually understand how the payments ecosystem was working. And I would agree with Haider, this remains the primary driver. I don't know if you have other questions, but I would like to, showcase the 2 slides that are remaining very rapidly. So let me know if I should do that now or later.
Sure, now would be great. Maggie, could you share those? Thanks.
One thing, so just to go back in this region, yes, there's a big resistance to change. Although in a number of countries, regulations have already been passed, there is this entrenched culture, and there's a very strong advocacy that is made not by us, but also by the banking sector. And I wanted to feature this slide from Kenya. And you see the orange lines is the banks. And you can imagine 2008, 9, 10, when M-Pesa was growing. I mean, those folks must have been, terrified that they're actually losing market share. But you kind of see with time that it's actually the entire financial system that grows. And I think that message has not yet made it to, everywhere in this region. I think that's a message that we need to push a bit more. And if you go to the next slide, we've just wrapped up a study on fintech, and we have found a revenue potential of $7 billion just in 6 countries in which we have focused. If only you get to reaching out 50% of the untapped markets. And we're not speaking, huge penetration levels. We're speaking levels similar to Uganda or Ghana or Ukraine. And this, for us, is the most important thing, because we do not need, to have another generation in waiting, as the infamous book said. This potential is here today. What we need is more innovation, as Haidar said, no matter how, more testing, and just more competition in the financial sector to the benefit of everyone, the incumbents, the new entrants, and the people at the end of the day.
Thanks, Nadine. And I think that's a really powerful reminder. And I think, we need more innovation. And I think there's an excellent comment in the chat just about technology being ready, and Zoom was poised to respond. But the problem with DFS in the MENA region, or the challenge, is that maybe the full infrastructure isn't in place, and also the regulatory environment. These are investments, to your point. We talk about them in a minute, but they take years to really cultivate and for those policies to take in place. So, I think right now, Nadine, during one of our conversations, you mentioned that, in COVID right now, we're seeing the demands on the system, and we're seeing kind of the advocacy and the pressure to change some of these regulatory barriers, but we really aren't going to see the full fruits of these until a couple years' time, when the regulations really catch up. So there's a lot in store, and just a lot of just exciting things, and thank you both just for the amazing work that both of you are doing in this. We do need to wrap up, and just with that, I want to thank each of our panelists, Nadine, Haidar, especially in this panel. I do encourage just our participants to reach out just with those additional questions. Just our panelists have such rich experience. And Jalil, Michele, and Mikhail, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your insights. Over to you, Jeanna.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks to Nadine and Haidar. Let us go to our second break. It will last approximately 10 minutes. We have the, we have the infographic that Sarah had shared in her presentation up. I think it's a good sort of landing point for further reflection, and captures some of the ideas and general concepts that are bubbling up about the use of digital financial services for economic development and for achieving health objectives. So we will just be on hold. Please take a brief break, and then we'll rejoin with our final panel discussion in 10 minutes. That will be, I show, maybe 23, 24 past the hour. We will start again. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. From our break, we will begin part 3 now. So it's our final discussion, and the focus is going to be on those second and third overarching questions that I raised at the beginning of the conference today. That is, where should we go next, and how will we get there? So our moderator for this discussion today is Ankunda Kariisa from USAID. She'll be joined by 3 experts who will share their reflections on what they've heard and what they think the future holds. So Ankunda, I'd like to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Jeanna. Yeah, so I just want to go ahead and get started with this third portion of the agenda, third and final portion of the agenda. Just a quick introduction before we get started. As Jeanna mentioned, my name is Ankunda Kariisa. I'm an innovation advisor at USAID. I work in the Global Health Bureau in the Center for Innovation and Impact. And before I joined the Global Health Bureau, I was still at USAID. I was in formerly the Global Development Lab, which is now DDI, and I worked on the Digital Financial Services team. So I'm really excited about this discussion that's bringing together both DFS and health. And yeah, I want to pass it over to the panelists so that they can introduce themselves quickly and just and share a little bit about what they work on in their respective organizations. So I'll hand it over to Jawad to introduce himself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Jawad Abbassi. I head the Mena region at the GSMA with the trade association of all the mobile operators globally. And of course, mobile money and connectivity for all and bridging the digital gap is of paramount importance to our members and the association. And I look forward to a very fruitful panel. Thank you.
Thank you. And Maha?
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Maha Bahu, I'm the CEO of Jawad, Jordan Payments and Clearing Company, for the last 2.5 years. Before that, I spent 30 years at the Central Bank of Jordan, heading the Digital Payments Infrastructure and Financial Inclusion Department.
Great, thank you. And Gilles?
Hi everyone, I'm Gilles Renouille. I'm the Global Head of Insurance Programs at Women's Wealth Banking. Women's Wealth Banking is an NGO headquartered in New York, and we are specialized in the financial inclusion of low-income women. Very pleased to be here.
Great, thank you all. So before we get started, I just wanted to do a quick recap of what we've heard so far. We've heard from really excellent panelists, and I appreciate all of their insight. So first we talked about supply and demand, and we saw that great video on Hello Pay Sub product that is for migrant workers to send remittances back home and also to be supported with insurance products. We talked a little bit about how the use of insurance products has shifted during the COVID pandemic. We heard about the collaboration between AXA and Democrats, and specifically about the role that microfinance can play in not only supplying insurance products, but also driving usage and uptake. We also heard about some data from UAE about the amount of money that individuals are spending towards health. I think it was somewhere around 20%, which really drives, I think, home the point of the importance of, understanding how GFS can help address health access and health coverage. We also talked a little bit about significant, I think, portion of the discussion was about the role that physical can play in driving adoption and utilization of insurance products. One statistic that stuck with me was something like 80% of reminder calls led to doctor consultations. So that human touch is really important when we think about digital. How can we sort of use it in a way that's most effective, and at what point do we need to consider that maybe more of a physical interaction is also important for product uptake and utilization. The second panel discussion was around enablers. So Nadine from CGAP told us about the 4 basic enablers: the non-bank e-money issuance, the risk-based consumer due diligence, the use of agents, specifically helping with registration and cash in and cash out, and then consumer protection, which is important for fostering trust. We heard from Haider from GIZ about the importance of the regulatory assessments when you're entering into a new market or looking to drive uptake of DFS in a new market. You don't have to, it's not a black and white process. Regulation is not just one way. There's a lot of ways that you can experiment and find ways that, and maybe even apply regulations to specific activities as opposed to activities as a whole. And so one example that I thought was really interesting is innovating around how to use licenses. For instance, maybe starting with a restricted license where you limit the number of clients or regions that a e-money issuer can work in, and then depending on how they prove their business model, you can either loosen restrictions or tighten them. We also talked about the importance of peer learning and how the learning curve can sometimes take anywhere from 2 to 5 years. So you really have to have these conversations as early as possible. And for countries where the infrastructure wasn't in place when COVID started, it was either you can fully scale and implement digital tools, or you can't. There wasn't really an opportunity for folks to pivot at that point because it was too late given how long it really takes for all this to be implemented. So that was just a broad overview. There was obviously a lot more that was covered in those sessions, but just some things that stood out to me. And so as we move into this discussion where we're looking forward, I first want to address the first question to Jawad, but I would invite obviously other panelists to jump in as well if they have anything to add. But Jawad, given your work with GSMA, what are some of the trends related to mobile money usage and mobile money statistics, DFS uptake and financial inclusion in the MENA region that you can share with us? I'd also want you, as you think of that question or think of that answer, what are some implications that you see for health access and health coverage? And what are some changes that you might have seen due to COVID-19? Over to you, Jawad.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. One of the silver linings of this very terrible pandemic is the acceleration of digitization and the acceleration of more financial inclusion. We've seen many governments say that we want to distribute cash help for the underprivileged, and of course the easier way was to set up mobile money and mobile money wallets, and we've seen that happen in many countries. There was a major growth of mobile money adoption by a lot of the population, and that was really triggered by the fact that the government said we'll send out the cash subsidies using mobile money wallets. Taking a step back, allow me to share some data, some pre-pandemic data from our State of the Industry report, 2019 mobile money. The 2020 State of Industry report, which will fully capture the effect that the COVID-19 pandemic had on accelerating mobile money adoption, will be out by mid-year alongside Mobile World Congress Barcelona. But for now, bear with me with sharing some global figures for mobile money in 2019. In 2019, by the end of it, we had over 1 billion registered mobile money accounts and $1.9 billion processed daily. These were basically, we've seen also a total of 290 mobile money deployments were live in a total of 95 countries in 2019, and 57% were digital transaction values. So basically, for the first time, digital transaction values exceeded cash in and cash out values, in value, of course, not in number of transactions. And another industry first was to have $22 billion in circulation, twice the amount that was in circulation in 2017. So a factor of 2 increase in 2 years. And again, more value circulating than exiting. So by 2019, basically, the cash in was 23 billion. Digital in of it was the 31%. Total in into the circulation was 23 billion, of which cash in was 69% and digital in was 31%. And then digital out was 6.4 billion, 37%, and cash out was 63%, and the total out was $18 billion. So more value circulating than existing, and peer-to-peer were 91, and mobile payments were 91%, where mobile payments were 9%. So it's actually quite a lot of very excellent developments in 2019, and the Sub-Saharan Africa region alone, for example, had 50 million new registered accounts. The MENA region there, I think, were exceeded 70 or 80 million accounts, but frankly, I don't have the numbers on me. I just have the global figures now. So to recap, basically, the 2019 was an excellent year. 2020 was a terrible year for humanity, bad year of pandemic, but there was a silver lining of enhancing and expediting adoption of mobile money, and also shaking out a lot of the regulatory hurdles that were there. So governments had to basically say, we need to remove a lot of hurdles. We've seen some very positive adoptions in many countries in the MENA region, triggered by the pandemic and the need to be able to reach citizens without having them to go to branches or without having them use physical money. So that's the update I will start with. It's a terrible year pandemic-wise, but there is a good silver lining when it comes to mobile money adoption and financial inclusion.
Thank you, Jawad. That was a really great summary, and I agree with you. I think that there is a silver lining, and I'd be curious to see what that report looks like later this year for the 2020 COVID era data. I would hope that the trend continues, especially given the government's push to deliver payments to individuals using mobile money. I think given sort of this positive note, I want to move over to Maha and ask, kind of integrating some of the statistics that we've heard from Jawad, how do you think this can impact digital health, and what kinds of technologies do you think we can leverage for things like provision of care or preventative care? What, I guess, where is the innovation in technology that you see specifically around digital health in the MENA region? And if you can, maybe consider how this might apply to women or refugees or other traditionally excluded populations in the MENA region. Over to you.
Actually, there is, from my point of view, a kind of indirect and direct marriage between healthcare and digital financial services. One of the areas where I see similarities and potential benefits is that both really focus on human centricity or customer centricity, and healthcare could be patient centricity, where they can benefit from each other. The very important thing is in the financial services, the digital payments infrastructure and platform. They provide actually the foundation for other services and trades to benefit. And innovating in fintech and payment space transforms the platform to other sectors, for agri-tech, for edutech, and definitely for health tech as well. The integration, one of them, listening to Bilal or Jalal Abadi from Abdi, I'm forwarding or extending an open invitation in front of everyone to cooperate with us. Could be in digital experiment where we can integrate innovative health solution with innovative payment and financial services. Could be Shops Plus can even partner with us to support this initiative. So there's a huge in this regard. One of the area I believe that digital financial services are providing, as Haida Baghdadi and Nadine focus on micro-saving products, safe vessels to fund or to transfer money and to save for people, to help them to get access to more of financial services like microcredit, microinsurance. The potential globally in insurance tech is also emerging globally, with the potential of rising at 41% till 2023. A huge potential in untapped areas in DFS. I can see in patient financing, management of unplanned medical expenses, better claim settlement experience, reimbursement methods, and customized medical loans. Many of the DFS services innovative that would open the road and open the path to expand access to medical services through the DFS services. An area I can see where we can benefit the innovation that took place in data mining, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Actually, wealth and health, they are the two sides of our well-being. More of the attention has been given to the wealth area, to the financial area, more innovation and investment. Although health is more important, so maybe we can benefit from what has been done in the artificial intelligence, machine learning, data mining in the financial sector to integrate with the health sector. EKYC and customer due diligence. It was mentioned during this conference. Once we integrate full EKYC and full customer due diligence with health care and health sector, the potential of identity theft or claiming someone else would reduce the uncertainty in this area and would really help in providing insurance, health insurance and medical insurance. Privacy, even it was mentioned that this sector is not well regulated when we come to health tech, or not as regulated as the financial services. Maybe we can benefit from GDPR, from many of the areas where the more focus was on financial services, and we can benefit from that. For gender and refugees and the bottom of the pyramid, once we start to innovate in many of the areas where I said about microinsurance or potential of loans and reimbursements, everything would reduce the transactional cost, would help to reach all people regardless of their socioeconomic well-being or socioeconomic background. Once we integrate all these things, we can help to reduce these gaps, even with the gender gap, because we have women world banking. There's a huge gap in financial inclusion, gender gap, huge gender gap in formal labor market, and a huge gender gap in health, access to health care and health insurance. Definitely, many of even women, they work from home or they have home-based businesses. So they are not subject to any kind of medical and healthcare umbrella. Maybe we can start really innovate and integrate all these areas from different parts of the industries, especially in the financial sector, to integrate them with the healthcare and health segment.
Wonderful. That was so excellent. Thank you for that review. And I agree. I think when you think about, well, there's a lot of different products, obviously, that we can consider, the microinsurance, microcredit products, saving products. I like the idea of integrating, all of the data that we have on AI with DFS and health and seeing how we can leverage that. And specifically, I think really thinking about the gender gap, not just in access to financial services, but also how that ties into the labor market gender gaps and also insurance coverage gender gaps. I think we sometimes just focus on one dimension, but really there are gaps in a lot of them. And so maybe if we can think about all the other dimensions as well, we can really address some of these issues more holistically.
If I can add one point, we started and tried a lot to integrate the digital rails and digital financial platforms with the health management information system in Jordan. Unfortunately, this was government sector, but we tried at least to integrate to ease the payments even for tiny payments. When we tried to do the same with the private sector, there was the tax evasion issue and these challenges. So maybe we can address something together in partnership in several countries and try to learn from the lessons, the challenges, and outcomes. That would be something good if we can do such efforts with the SHOP Plus program.
Excellent plug.
Ankunda, do you allow me to react to Maha?
Absolutely, yes.
Quickly, yeah. So
I wanted to go over to you next. So please feel free to react to that and add anything else too.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to give a bit more of context also with the background of COVID-19. When I say it, I think it will sound quite self-evident, but you can't deliver a baby digitally. Okay, you can't deliver a baby digitally. So you either deliver your baby at home or you deliver your baby in a hospital. And I think the MENA region is very heterogeneous in the sense of in countries like Jordan, I guess 99.5% of the women would be delivering their babies in the hospital. In Egypt, this is slightly different, and then in Sub-Saharan Africa and Morocco, it looks again different. But in the COVID time, the issue of financial inclusion with insurance is really important, and the access to health in general. And so I think if we had, I think there will be a need for the women to have the digital health service. But at one point, there is a physical delivery that needs to happen. And there is a moment where we need to take the woman and kind of give her confidence that this birth can happen. And I think in the COVID time, this has been really crazy. I mean, we're looking at the numbers on our schemes in the MENA region. I can tell you, if I take the example of Egypt, that, when you bear in mind that there's probably 60% of women who deliver their babies with a C-section, and we see that there is a clear drop in women going to deliver their babies in hospitals, then there is a real clear health issue. And if there was a service where they could actually call a long number or access a doctor, that would be really good. Now, that's in what sense there would be a need for women in these health services. I mean, also because women are the caregiver of the families, really health emergencies are on the top of their priority list. Now, I think the flip side, and thanks Jawad and Maha for your optimism, and I kind of share it, that if you allow me to kind of bring the realistic numbers, I was just checking the GSMA report on the MENA region, and actually the gender gap has widened in phone ownership in the MENA region. So it's widened actually from 8% in 2017. At that time, a woman was 8% less likely than a man to own a phone. And now in 18-19, it was 9%, and I'm curious to see how it looks like in 2020. I mean, hopefully with COVID, things will have changed. And now there's a huge gap also on the internet use. In 2017, 20% gap, so women were 20% less likely to use internet. And in 2019, it's 21 after having decreased in 2018 to 19. So it went down in 2018 and then went up in 2019 again. And I think that when you bear in mind that most of the services that are available for health are actually accessible via a smartphone and via internet, I think we need to, the technology is important, but we also need to bridge that gap to get the women actually on board with the system. So that's the viewpoint I wanted to give on saying, I think there's been great progress in the region. Now, how do we bring the low-income women into that circle? Because they are going to provide for, they are the multiplicator afterwards for their families, taking care of the health of the household. They can actually give these low-income household access to the services.
Thanks, Jill, for those statistics, and definitely a somber reminder of what we still need to do in the region to help women advance. And I guess I want to stick with you just for a little bit longer, if that's okay. And I know you work on insurance. And you talked about some of the gaps that you mentioned earlier. What is how can we build consumer confidence, specifically and trust in digital services for women? What are some of the ways in which you guys have maybe looked at that in your work? And then kind of the same coin, on the other side of the coin, how can we show value for these digital health insurance products to end users and other stakeholders? So thinking about the value and then also how to build trust and confidence. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so perhaps I'll start with the value, if you allow, because I think, like all of us, we buy into something if there is value for us. Trust is something important, but you need to see the value. And I can name a few things that are intrinsic value for digital solutions. First of all, and I think it's particularly real in the MENA region, women are time poor. So they don't have time, they have to take care of their families, wake up very early in the morning, do the household, do their business while the children are at school, if schools are open. And then when the family comes back, then take care of them. So she has no time. So having the ability to do a transaction at home is going to save her time. She doesn't want to stick in traffic. And in the region also, harassment has been a big topic. So if you have a digital access, then there is definitely value. She wants to have a certain privacy. It's about, do my neighbors know what I'm doing? And if you have a digital transaction, you can have a lot of privacy. You don't want to go to the bank. You have, again, the social norms. That's very important. And if you can do it from home, you can also have smaller amount. You can, if you are able to actually bring your cash somewhere, even if you, let's imagine for a second a digital world where money would be digital, then she can actually do the saving really on small amounts on her business. So I think from that perspective, and that's what our research has shown, is that there is definitely value in digital. But I think because of the background, and this is where the trust is coming, and the kind of self-confidence, if you allow me, a self-confidence in being able to master the digital service. I think this is where this trust is coming. She needs to be able to try it. And, we have a rule of, six learnings that we had from digital products, which is it needs to work on a feature phone. I was mentioning the 20% gap on internet. So she may have a smartphone, but she will, 20% are not going to have the internet. So it needs to work on a feature phone. She needs to have a physical place where she can actually interact. Someone needs to help her. So she needs to have an agent, or she needs to be able to speak to her friends and kind of learn as she goes. And she needs to have the ability to develop trust. I'm going to get back to that. There's one point I want to mention that is really important. I think it was mentioned in a previous conversation. This is the affordability. When you have to go to a branch and it takes £5 to take a bus or ride a taxi, or £10, you can't have a transaction that costs more than that. She will be able to do the math, but she needs to kind of see that it's going to be affordable for her. Now, how can she deliver, get the trust? One example could be with SMSs. When she sees the transaction, getting the immediate SMS that it's working. And that's where the whole platform needs to work. She needs to really experience, this is a bit the WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. What she gets on the phone, what she tries, she can actually see that. And I think from there, the trust can happen. But really, we need to take her where she is right now. And I think that's, to me, or to Women's Wealth Banking, as far as digital services are concerned, the main challenge is really, how do we take this huge client base of low-income women who have an interest in using digital services, but how to bring them to get the trust and really transact on a regular basis and really see the value of that. I'll finish perhaps with one number, is that when you, and that's also from the GSMA report, that's actually from Algeria, but I was quite shocked when you actually ask clients about whether the mobile is relevant. There is a huge percentage, I think this is 20%, who say there is no real business case for me. I don't need a bank account, or I don't need to have digital services. So the trust comes after we have been able to demonstrate the value. These two things go together.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gilles. And unfortunately, we're running out of time. This discussion I knew was going to go by quickly, but it even went by faster than I thought. So just circling back maybe to all the participants, just to provide just one final, I guess, high-level point that we can wrap up with. And so the question is, how will we get there? And I guess for Jawad, Maha, and Gilles, what do you see as maybe that next step, that really important move, whether it's by other donors or regulators or government, and even non-financial versus a financial move? What would you say if you could pick one thing as the next step that you think would really help advance this cause? What would you call out? And this is very high level. And I'll start with Jawad. And again, please keep it brief because we're almost out of time.
Absolutely. I just want to remind everybody that the unleashing of the innovation that we saw, whether it's mobile money or the application ecosystem, the e-commerce, streaming Netflix, happened because the world had 4G, the fourth generation networks, which is not the only, but the first truly harmonized cellular networks that became the mobile broadband platform upon which everything happened. So we have to remember that the innovation that we're seeing now in mobile money, in e-commerce, and digitization is enabled by the largest platform of connectivity on earth, which is the mobile broadband networks. These did not come out of the blue. These needed massive investments and require forward-looking government regulations on spectrum, on taxation, to ensure the sustainability of investments in mobile broadband networks. So the broadband infrastructure upon which everything is built, we must not forget that it requires forward-looking regulations by governments in taxation and spectrum policy to make sure that it's expanding and it's reaching more people, that then they can use all the innovative mobile applications that we've seen so far.
Great, thanks. Maha?
I would invite urge the donors to conduct digital experiments in countries where we can create, it's not a sandbox, regulatory sandbox, but it's something similar. We can try to cover 360 areas, the innovation related, customization to this country, integration with DFS, different innovative financial products related to healthcare, maybe launching such thing in a country would allow us to open our eyes to areas that would require regulation, areas would require less regulation or just trying to monitor, then disseminating knowledge and learning from this experiment before even putting on the table regulatory frameworks and huge investments without proving the benefits of these huge investments.
Excellent. I fully agree. And Gilles, over to you.
Yeah, sorry. I think there would be a host of things that I would actually welcome in this field. What I really think would start to move the needle is to have really data disaggregated information. Sorry, gender disaggregated data. It's late here. Mixing up my words, but gender disaggregated data. Because most of the time, and when I travel through the MENA region, you know, I'm saying almost we, but I think we're a society that is very much man-driven. And so when you speak to players, they say we're equal societies. We don't exclude women, but actually we don't track it because it would not be legal. You know, if we start tracking it, then we may be making differences. And I really believe that's important for all the players to really. I'm really thankful for the GSMA kind of looking at this gender gap and bringing that report on a regular basis, because this is putting it on the radar. This is putting it on the dashboard. I really believe that the economy will benefit if women are integrated in the digital services. We know that 95% of them work in the informal economy, and so every minute counts for her. So if we're really able to make that transparent in terms of the business case for women, especially in the low-income segment, this is going to move the needle.
Thank you so much. We're out of time. Again, if anybody has questions, please follow up with the organizers and we can circulate those questions and you guys can get some answers. But Again, I'd like to thank my panelists for your participation, for your insight, and I want to hand it over to Jeanna.
Yes, thank you, Ankunda, and thanks to the panelists. We're right at the hour. We will close the conference 3 to 5 minutes late. So with that time remaining, we'll run over just a couple of minutes. I would like to invite our hosts from USAID to have a brief final word. I will invite Ian Hundley, excuse me, and Amy Kay to share a couple of key takeaways. Ian, welcome to this discussion, and over to you.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Ian Hundley, and I'm the ICT for the advisor in the Middle East Bureau at USAID. I want to first thank the panelists for sharing their insights around health and digital financial services, the moderators for today's discussion, and the Shops Plus team, not only for coordinating this e-conference, but also for their insightful digital financial services assessment released last year. And last but not least, certainly I want to thank you, the attendees, for joining us today. In April of 2020, we at USAID released our digital strategy. It centers around 2 strategic objectives. First, to improve measurable development and humanitarian assistance outcomes through the responsible use of digital technology in our programming. And secondly, to strengthen the openness, inclusiveness, and security of country-level digital ecosystems. To achieve these objectives in the MENA region, we want to continue to work with civil society organizations, our partner governments, and to work even more closely with the private sector. In 2012, and what seems like generations ago, USAID partnered with the UNCDF, civil society organizations such as the Ford and Gates Foundations, and private industry partners such as Visa and MasterCard to launch the Better Than Cash Alliance. This initiative offered technical assistance to governments and local private sector organizations, helping emerging economies facilitate the shift to digital payments. Looking today at the growing emergence of digital financial services and the digital ecosystems of our partner countries, we know this model of collaboration works. As we look to the future, how ironic it is that COVID-19, a virus that threatens our health, our most basic necessity and a fundamental human right, irrespective of the country we live in, socioeconomic background, gender, race, or sexual orientation, has served as an engine to leapfrog us into the digital future. Digital is no longer an option. E-government services are continually expanding throughout the MENA region, both in middle-income countries and countries with challenging political environments alike. This, along with relatively high regional mobile penetration, support of the private sector, and a younger trending population, which could generate a demographic dividend, creates enormous opportunity over the next few years for drastic economic growth fueled by inclusive and open digital ecosystem. So we look forward to continuing this conversation around health and digital financial services and how we can continue to work together in our partner countries to expand digital services and opportunities to the underserved, the underbanked, and the uninsured. Thank you.
Amy, over to you. I think we'll just take a few moments for you to conclude, and then we'll close today's conference.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Ian, for those great comments, and just adding my thanks to Shops Plus, the fantastic panelists, and our attendees, of course. We've had a great forum today with some important discussions and way forward connected to digital health, including the intersection of digital financial services and the aspiration for universal healthcare, or UHC, for all people in the region, including the most vulnerable, those on the move, key populations, and women looking for ways to move their families out of poverty, to get more connected, confident, and have more precious time. We have seen some points of real power in our discussion today in technology, the billions in remittances, and what happens when local communities and their governments support innovation. We have heard from colleagues in the region working on digital health efforts to include our own Middle East Bureau Health Office supported work with civil society, reaching the most marginalized communities, including people living with HIV and the LGBTI community, and also mission work on challenges and successes of digital health information and management systems, which continue. DFS, as our expert panelists have shared in discussion with us, has proven to be one of many promising digital and increasingly accessible and sought-after advances to support stronger health for all. In the Middle East region, we see opportunities for leveraging the best of all worlds and that tech silver lining from the pandemic, telemedicine, mobile money, insurance, banking, and peer-to-peer learning across the region, and the offers for partnership and challenges for innovation support made in this very conference. We also acknowledge the need for, and these days socially distanced and masked, face-to-face interaction to support behavior change, awareness, and that tipping point transition to trust in new systems and resulting greater access. In addition to the loud and clear need for building government capacity to establish and support stronger regulation, and departments like the Department of Financial Inclusion in Egypt and other countries in the region making such strides. For now, we invite you all to please stay connected with us as we move forward with our Middle East Bureau digital strategy and USAID digital health vision. Please also visit the Middle East Bureau supported Shops Plus reports online on DFS and also on health private sector in the region. And please share those reports and the recording of this conference with those who cannot join us in real time today. Thank you all for making this wonderful first forum around critical digital advances that support UHC in the Middle East and North Africa. Stay safe, healthy, and connected, and have a great day and evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Ian. You put a great capstone on this. To everybody, thanks for your attendance. Have a pleasant rest of your day or evening. Thank you and goodbye.